Welcome to the course Digital Transformation and Technological Innovation. So, we are into our introductory module and now we will start our next lecture. So, let us come to the next point, that is about World Wide Web. So, earlier we talked about briefly about the internet and the telecommunication network and how the telecommunication network facilitates or enables the networks, and internet being one of the largest one of them, right. Now we move to the next thing, that is web or World Wide Web, www. So what web is about? This is a network of links to documents on the internet. So these are also called web pages, right. So internet is about connecting computers. So the internet is a computer network, the largest one, but essentially when we are surfing through internet, essentially we are looking to find certain information, looking to find certain documents, certain files. Web is one way to actually achieve that. So it creates a network of links of documents on the internet. So different documents is stored across the network, across different servers, computers over the network, and they would be linked to each other so that it would be easy for us to navigate through those network of documents. So it is these documents, they would essentially be linked through those links, right. So you open one page and there would be link for another page, and you click on that and you land on to the next page. So that is how seamless flow from one page to another page is facilitated through these links. So essentially when we click on a link on a particular given page or the document, right, then by clicking on that link we create a network to another document. So that is why the network of links. So web pages, what they contain, they can be text, graphics, video or audio, right. So these web pages would be containing this, and there would be links floating all around the pages, and once we are interested in a particular link we click on that, and that's how that link creates a network and connects us from this document, from this page to maybe another page, right. Now next is web server. So who is facilitating this service for this network of links, right. So web servers across the internet, hosted or deployed across the internet, connected to internet, they play a role in this. So what is a web server? A computer that runs web services to provide information and access control to its documents. So there are lots of computers referred to as web servers which are running web services so that they can whatever documents that they want to allow people to access, right. So they will control the access. So whatever documents that they want people to publicly access via internet, so they will manage that through the web services, right. So similarly there are lots of millions, thousands of such web servers connected to the internet. So whenever we are accessing a particular web page which is a document in a way, so that would be being hosted by some web server which is running a web service for that purpose, right. So in a way we can say that when we talk about the web and when we talk about the network of links, essentially it is like a network of web servers. So we say internet is network of computers. Similarly we can say web or www is a network of web servers. So those web servers are obviously running web services and they are sharing certain documents and controlling access to those documents as to who can open which documents and all, right. So this is about web and web server and the network of web servers and the network of links to documents. Then moving on to intranet. Now what is intranet? So this is a internal web network. So we already understood what is a web network, which is a network of links to documents or network of web servers. Now we have something similar within our organizations, campus, in-premise thing, right. Then that can be termed as internal web network. So internal web network within an organization provides a quick access to work resources. So organization would be running a set of business activities there will be lots of business processes, right, and there would be so much of information that would float around from one activity to another activity, from one process to another process, from one department to another department. And internal web network, that would be different departments, different units, they can have their own web servers, they can host their own files. For example, finance department might want to host pay slips and other financial documents that they might be sharing with internally with the employees. Then there might be other groups which might host knowledge management system, and they might be sharing some of those files. And there might be other groups which might be sharing manual pages for various equipments or software programs, right. So therefore internal web network, which is network of web servers within the organization or network of links to documents within the organization. So it provides quick access to work resources, the documents which are useful to run internal business processes. Some processes will connect to the external entities also. So this internal web network will facilitate access to those resources, those documents, those pages, which might include knowledge management document and so many other documents, right. So facilitates the exchange of documents for collaborative projects also. So there might be teams and members of the team sitting in different location, or maybe sitting within the same lab, same office room, and but they would be sharing, they can easily share the documents through their computers, because they would be running a web network, and sharing of documents will happen. So they can collaborate. If two members or more than two members within a team are working on the same project, same problem, they can collaborate that. So internal web network facilitate that kind of work environment, right. So now if we look at what's happening nowadays, so we see that new intranet web designs are actually incorporating social media features, because most of the most of the users nowadays, most of us, we are all the time on social media. And the new generation is also their first experience when it comes to computers and internet and these computing devices, their first experience is likely to be a social media app, right. So most people, most of us whether kids who are growing up and or the existing users, now social media has become an important element. So some of the features of social media, we are familiar with that, we are okay with that, and therefore to increase the familiarity and to increase the adoption of internal web network, many intranet web designs, they are trying to adopt, they are trying to incorporate social media features. So let's move on. Next is extranet, right. So extranet is actually an extension of the internal web network that we talked about. So though internal web network, we want only users or employees within the organizations to access the documents, to access the pages or the information that is being shared over the internet over the intranet portal, right, or the internal web network, right. But sometimes we might want to provide control access to some authorized to some authorized internal resources of our organization to external entities such as partners, customers. So sometimes some authorized internal resources, that means some web pages, some documents, we want to authorize for control access, we want to give control access, which so some of these documents we want to allow the customers or the partners to access and continue with use that information for their own business process, for their own activities, right. So extranet facilitates that, we refer to that kind of network as extranet. So extension of internal web network, where some more users from outside the organizations have also been given control access to certain small subset of maybe internal resources or the relevant resources. Example of this, so we know or not, but most of us are actually using extranet all the time. For example, links shared to track shipped goods, right. So whenever we order something and through e-commerce websites, and then they will have their own delivery partner. Those delivery partner would be third party logistic companies for the e-commerce in supplying managing the logistics transportation for the e-commerce companies. So when we track the status of our order, so eventually some logistic company is managing that, and they would be updating the movement of that particular order, the package, right, and they will allow the customers and their partners, right. So for a logistic company, the e-commerce company would be the partner, and the customers of e-commerce company, because they would like to check the status of their order, right, and the e-commerce company would also like to monitor the shipping status. So the logistic company might allow create an extranet and allow the status checks for certain documents to their customers and partners. So they would be sharing links for that. So links would connect to that particular page where that you can give enter the particular numbers for your order, and therefore you can do the status checks. So that is actually demonstration of extranet in a way. Then when we order items from suppliers or we access vendor support, then you would also notice that some of these activities, when we do that, URLs changes. You are into an e-commerce website and you are checking these status of these shipped goods, or you are checking orders that you have done from your suppliers if you are an organization, and if you are looking for some vendor support for your computer, laptop, or some other thing, right, you would see the URL change from one organization to another organization. The other one might be the one providing support in terms of logistics or in terms of software support or customer service support. So some of these are examples of extranet. Then moving on, people who manage IT. So who are the top management or senior management people who are actually responsible for managing IT, and that managing IT is important for our information systems, like we discussed in the previous sessions. So the main person would be Chief Information Officer, CIO, or the role of CIO might be under Chief Technology Officer or the CTO, right. So these are the main top management people for managing IT for information systems: Chief Information Officer, CIO, or Chief Technology Officer, CTO, and there would be a number of engineers and managers and other people who would be working under them. There would be whole team to manage this. So the CIO CTO team includes all the people who manage, run, program, and maintain IT for the organization's information systems, right. So the whole team would be needed, right. So let's move on. Then there would be procedures. So remember we talked about different components of information systems, right, and the IT was there and different components of IT. Then there were two more things, people and procedures. So when we say people, essentially we are talking about the CIO and CTO and the whole vertical under them, right. Then comes the procedures to manage IT. So what is this about? This is about detailing these strategies, policies, methods, rules, right, for using information systems, right, because you want to increase the production time or for your systems, for your information system, and you want to reduce the production downtime, right. You want to increase the production runtime, or in other words you want to reduce the production downtime. So for that, and also you need to manage the maintenance activity for your systems, for your IT, and therefore you need to come up with the strategies, policies, so that optimization or reduction of production downtime can manage your servers, computers are in a good shape and the life of those machines goes up. So for that the strategies, policies, methods, rules, and all these need to be figured out, need to be detailed, right. So procedures part of information systems actually caters to that. So when we say procedure, what we mean? So procedure defines the steps to follow in order to achieve a specific end result, right. So there would be different activities, different within listed or detailed within the procedures that one might want to follow. So detailed steps would be there. So there were different procedures would be there, right. how to schedule maintenance activity for particular servers, right, and many other scheduling and other things that would be there, maintenance, upgrade, managing the upgrades, new versions of so many different software, system software, application software that would be running in a way to support the information systems. The main machine, main software program or the enterprise software within the information system that might also need upgrade, right. So all those things are there. The backup, one might have to schedule the backup for the databases that are connected to the information systems. So there's so many things that might need detailing. So procedures part actually represents all those aspects. Now moving on, right. So that was about so many different aspects of information systems we covered. Now we'll move on to information economy. So information economy in general, we talked about so many examples of information systems where we also had, we talked about the software products, but we also talked about the internet platforms. We also talked about the e-commerce platforms. So all those things we talked about. So essentially, if we put together all those examples that we had discussed, in earlier session, so the information economy, we can clearly see that it is dominated and run by the internet, social media, e-commerce, and cloud firms. Right, most of the apps that we use through our smartphone, they are cloud apps. Most of the activities in terms of buying, selling nowadays that we do through e-commerce apps. There are so many e-commerce companies. We spend a lot more time on social media and then internet for our own productive activities. We would be logging into our university websites, organizations website, or for so many other things for personal and professional tasks. We would be using internet. So the internet firms, which is essentially one big example is Google. Then social media examples, Facebook, X, then LinkedIn, then e-commerce, Amazon, Flipkart, and then there are so many new startups that have come up over the years, Zomato, Swiggy, and many others, right. And the cloud firms, then we go back to the big tech, that is Amazon and Microsoft and Google. So all these companies are essentially running the backbone of information economy, right, because many other firms, their apps, their services, right, their information systems are also in a way being supported by some of these firms. For example, Netflix is being supported by the cloud services of Amazon, right. So there are similarly there are many other examples for this. So information economy is dominated by these firms, internet, social media, e-commerce, and cloud firms, and this also includes the the government organizations, government department, or public sector companies for their own, for hosting their own websites or doing their own e-commerce activity within the government space, right. They would also be relying on lots of services that are being given by these firms, right. So coming back to it, information products and services of these firms serve as common examples of information systems. So that we have already discussed in the previous session, right. So they dominate the information economy, and the systems that they are providing us, the systems that we are interacting with, right. So they are some common examples of information systems. Now which are these companies, just to have more clarity on this. So information economy power engines. So these are actually firms which are powering the information economy. So first we need to look at the big tech. So Google. So whenever we want to search anything, we go to Google search engine. Now they have also incorporated the Gen AI part into it, right. So we can do a conversational search using the same Google search, right. So conversational search is embedded into the Google search, right. So the Google is there, then the Amazon is there, which is providing the cloud, the number one cloud vendor across globe, and then e-commerce website that they run, and many other businesses that they run. So Amazon is there, then Meta, which is having Facebook and Instagram and many social media apps that they are having, right. Then the Microsoft running operating system and cloud vendor and social media like LinkedIn, and now the stake in the OpenAI, right. So these companies are the big tech, and you would see if we start from the Microsoft, which covers the software products also, right, and the cloud is covered, and the software products are also covered. If we consider Microsoft, social media is covered through Meta, Amazon touches the e-commerce, right, and Google, the search and search part of it, and other parts, for example video streaming through YouTube. So these are the big tech firms. Then we come to the AI firms. Some of them are quite new, some old. So OpenAI is the new one, right, and then Google is there, then Meta is there, Anthropic is there. So these are some of the AI firms, so which have come with their large language models, which we nowadays interact with either through Google search or Google Assistant, or through ChatGPT, or other systems that are being hosted by the these firms. So these are the AI firms. They are also in a way power engines for future of the information economy, because generative AI and AI is going to be the future. So the AI system and generative AI systems are the future great examples of information systems in general. Then we come to the hardware firms, right. So there are some firms which are actually providing or producing the hardware which are being used by all these firms themselves, right. So for example NVIDIA, so they are in a way supporting the AI revolution that is happening. Intel, the traditional revolution of computing in general. Qualcomm is there, and Apple is there, right. So these are the hardware firms, right. They are basically known for their hardware products, right. For Apple for iPhone and tablets. The Qualcomm is there for Intel, and NVIDIA for all these CPUs and GPUs, right. Then we have software firms where we have the Microsoft, Oracle, and SAP. So here in these examples that I have listed out, Oracle and SAP join the Microsoft in terms of covering the much of the enterprise software products and other application software also, right. So put together some of these companies that you can see in this particular slide, they are in a way controlling the information economy, or they are the power engines of information economy. So moving on, next is enterprise system. So now we'll go back to the enterprise context or the organizational context, where whether even if you are not a tech firm, you are a non-tech firm primarily, then also you to be able to run or support your business processes and activities or business functions, you would be using number of information systems. We'll talk about what are these systems that are primarily used by most of the firms, right. So enterprise system, we'll talk about the first one is a transaction processing system, TPS, right. So what this system is about, this is an information system to perform and record business transactions, right. So there are lots of transactions that happen for any business, whether the sales transaction or the payment transactions. All those transactions need to be recorded somewhere. So it is better to have a transaction processing system which can cater to this, right. So there would be a salesperson who would be interacting with the transaction processing system, sales manager or somebody else, and that the customers, they would also be interacting. So there is a whole information system architecture that we talked about in the previous session. You can apply that here in case of transaction processing system also. So TPS, they actually support the basic business systems or functions. That means if they are basic, that means most organizations, especially if they are customer facing organization, they are likely to have a TPS. So now when we are talking about the transaction processing system, what is a transaction? So there is a business related exchange. So some exchange is happening, and for example payments to employees and suppliers. So that is a transaction, one internal for employees, then suppliers are also there, external. Then sales to customer, right. So that will also be. So maybe the organization might like to have different TPS for sales and different TPS for the employees or the suppliers, right. So move on. So when it comes to the employees, the TPS would become the payroll system. Payroll system is actually considered to be one of the first business systems to be computerized, because any organization to be able to run their their business, they need the support or the trust or the contributions of their employees, and to be able to do that, they need to incentivize them in a timely manner, and to have the desired productivity and efficiency in terms of payments or paychecks to their own employees. Businesses would like to have the payroll systems. This was one of the one of those information systems which were which were quickly adopted, right, for their direct benefit that was there. So businesses could see direct benefit in this particular case. So payroll system became actually one of the first business systems to be computerized. So what is a payroll system? This is transaction processing system. This is a TPS because essentially it is managing, performing or recording the transactions. So a transaction processing system to produce employee paychecks and related reports, right. So let's move to the next. That is another example that we interact with every few weeks or months or year, at least once in a year. This is online reservation system. So what is an online reservation system? So as the name says that this is a transaction processing system. Again here also transactions are being performed and recorded. This is transaction processing system to book flights, train or hotel rooms, and then produce tickets and invoices and all that, right. So whenever we are planning a trip by train or by flight or booking our stay at hotels, right. So we would be interacting nowadays through e-commerce websites and portal. So essentially we are interacting when we are selecting a particular seat or selecting a particular hotel room. Essentially we are interacting with the TPS part of that e-commerce portal, right. So online reservation system, this is another example of transaction processing system. So let's have let's look at a figure to understand this better, so that we have a fair understanding of what is a TPS, one of the more common enterprise systems. So this is the figure, and as you can see that here you are. So let's say you want to do your reservation plus online booking, and for that you will like to check your fares, and here you see fares will filling publication, this activity is there, and it will feed onto these also, because if there is any change in the fare, then the relationship, customer relationship should know, revenue management should also know. So you look at your booking, you have identified your seat, you are checked fares, now you book, right. So you reach here ticketing, this will also feed into revenue accounting and all that, right. Then while you have booked the flight, the actual timing and schedule might slightly change. So there has to be actual flight movements and all that. So that also should be connected to this, because the customer, the person, the traveler who has booked the ticket, they need to know the timing if there is any change to it, right. So that would also be connected to that. And then when the actual thing happens, the passenger check-in and all that, so that will also be there. Other aspects are also shown here. So this is for airline industry, or something similar diagram can also depict some of other scenarios for these TPS and in particular online reservation system. So let's stop here, and we'll continue our introductory module in the next session. Thank you.